The silence at that dinner table was so thick you could cut it with a knife. My dad's question hung in the air like a bomb that had just gone off, and everyone's eyes were on me. $2,000 a month. Such a simple number, but it felt like my entire life was being weighed and measured in that moment. I wanted to disappear into the floor, but there was nowhere to hide from what was coming next. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. Growing up in suburban Phoenix, our family dinners were sacred. Every Sunday at 6 sharp, we'd gather around Mom's antique oak table, the one she inherited from her grandmother back in Ohio. Dad would sit at the head, Mom to his right, my younger brother Marcus across from me, and my older sister Rachel whenever she wasn't working her nursing shifts at the hospital. It was our time to catch up, share stories, and pretend everything was normal. But normal had been slipping away from our family for months now. Dad had been different lately. James Mitchell had always been the steady one. Worked at the same accounting firm for 23 years, never missed a mortgage payment, coached Marcus's Little League team every spring. But since the company downsizing in January, something had shifted. The laugh lines around his eyes seemed deeper, more like worry lines. He'd started checking his phone during dinner, which he'd never done before. Mom, Patricia, tried to keep things light, but even her famous pot roast couldn't mask the tension that had settled over our household like morning fog. That particular Sunday in March started like any other. The Arizona sun was already setting behind the mountains, painting our dining room walls in shades of orange and pink. Mom had outdone herself. Pot roast, mashed potatoes, green beans from her garden, and her signature dinner rolls that could make anyone forget their troubles. At least, that's what I thought. I'd been dreading this dinner all week, though I couldn't quite put my finger on why. Maybe it was because I'd been dodging Mom's calls about my job situation. Maybe it was because I knew they'd eventually ask about my finances, and I wasn't ready for that conversation. At 26, I was supposed to have my life figured out, but here I was, still trying to piece together a career that made sense. The conversation started innocuously enough. Marcus, who was finishing his senior year at Arizona State, was talking about his internship at a local tech startup. His eyes lit up as he described the projects he was working on, the mentorship he was receiving, the possibilities that lay ahead. Rachel chimed in about her promotion to head nurse, how she was finally making enough to start looking at buying her own place instead of renting that tiny apartment downtown. I sat there, cutting my pot roast into smaller and smaller pieces, hoping nobody would turn the spotlight on me. But Dad's attention had been drifting throughout dinner, and I could sense him building up to something. When Marcus finished talking about his internship, Dad set down his fork and looked directly at me. "Sarah," he said, and something in his tone made everyone else go quiet. "We need to talk about your situation." My stomach dropped. I'd been working as a freelance graphic designer for the past year and a half, ever since I'd left my soul-crushing job at a marketing agency downtown. The freedom had been intoxicating at first, choosing my own clients, setting my own schedule, working from the coffee shop on the corner, or from my apartment whenever inspiration struck. But freedom came with a price, and that price was financial instability. Some months were good, really good. I'd land a big project designing a complete brand identity for a new restaurant, or creating marketing materials for a local nonprofit, and suddenly I'd have more money than I knew what to do with. But those months were followed by dry spells that seemed to stretch on forever, where I'd refresh my email obsessively, hoping for new inquiries that never came. "What about my situation?" I asked, though I already knew where this was heading. Dad leaned back in his chair, that familiar crease appearing between his eyebrows that meant he'd been thinking about something for a while. "Your mother and I have been talking about your career choice, about your finances." Mom reached over and touched his arm gently. "James, maybe we should discuss this privately with Sarah later." But Dad shook his head. "No, this affects all of us. Sarah, how much are you making per month on average with this freelance work?" The question hit me like a physical blow. Not because it was unexpected, but because I'd been dreading having to give an honest answer. The truth was, I barely knew myself. My income fluctuated so wildly that some months I felt rich, and others I was eating ramen noodles and wondering how I'd make rent. "It varies," I said weakly. "Varies how much?" Dad pressed. "Give me a range." I could feel Rachel and Marcus watching me, waiting. Mom had stopped eating entirely, her hands clasped in her lap. The silence stretched out until I finally managed to speak. Some months it's good, really good, like 4 or 5,000. Dad's eyebrows went up slightly. And the bad months? This was the part I'd been dreading. Sometimes it's closer to 800, or less. The admission hung in the air like smoke. I saw Mom close her eyes briefly, and Rachel made a small sound that might have been sympathy or concern. Marcus just stared at his plate. Dad nodded slowly, as if this confirmed something he'd already suspected. So you're telling me that in a given year, you might make anywhere from $10,000 to $60,000, and you have no way of predicting which it'll be from month to month. When he put it like that, it sounded even worse than I'd thought. The creative industry is unpredictable, I said defensively, but I'm building a client base. Things are getting more stable. Are they? Dad asked. Because your mother mentioned you borrowed money for rent last month. Heat flooded my cheeks. I'd asked Mom for help when a client had delayed payment on a big project, leaving me short for March rent. I'd promised to pay her back as soon as the payment came through, and I had, but apparently that transaction hadn't gone unnoticed by Dad. That was just temporary, I said, a cash flow issue. Dad leaned forward, his expression growing more serious. Sarah, I need you to really think about this. You're 26 years old, you have no health insurance, no retirement savings, no emergency fund. You're living paycheck to paycheck, except you don't even have regular paychecks. Each word felt like a small knife. Not because he was being cruel, but because everything he was saying was true. I'd been so focused on the freedom and creativity of freelance work that I'd ignored all the practical realities that came with it. Your father isn't trying to be harsh, Mom interjected softly. We're worried about you, about your future. I know you love what you do, Rachel added, and your work is beautiful. But Dad has a point about stability. Marcus, ever the peacemaker, tried to lighten the mood. Maybe there's a middle ground? Like, what if Sarah kept freelancing but also had some kind of part-time steady job? But Dad wasn't finished. He sat back in his chair, and I could see him calculating something in his head. Finally, he looked at me again with an expression I couldn't quite read. Let me ask you something, he said, his voice quieter now but somehow more intense. If someone offered you a job, a real job with benefits and paid time off and a predictable future, what would you need to make per month to consider giving up the freelance work? The question caught me completely off guard. I'd expected judgment, maybe a lecture about financial responsibility, but not this. Dad wasn't just criticizing my choices. He was asking me to put a price on my dreams. I stared at him across the table, my mind racing. What would I need to make monthly to give up freelancing? The honest answer was that I'd never really thought about it in those terms. I'd been so focused on building something of my own, on being my own boss, that the idea of going back to a traditional job felt like admitting defeat. I don't know, I stammered. I mean, it's not just about the money. Dad's expression didn't change. Everything is about money, Sarah. Not in a shallow way, but in a practical way. Money is security. It's healthcare when you get sick. It's a roof over your head when you're 65 and can't work anymore. James, Mom warned softly, but he held up a hand. No, Patricia, she needs to hear this. He turned back to me. I've been doing some research. The average graphic designer in Phoenix with your experience level makes between $45,000 and $60,000 a year. That's about $4,000 to $5,000 a month, with benefits. Steady, predictable. The numbers hit me harder than I expected. In my best months, I was making that much or more, but those best months were rare, and they were always followed by stretches where I barely scraped by. But those jobs are soul-crushing, I said, thinking of my old position at the marketing agency. 8 hours a day designing ads for products I don't believe in, working for clients who change their minds every 5 minutes, sitting in meetings that could have been emails. Rachel cleared her throat. Not all jobs are like that, Sarah. I love being a nurse. It's challenging and meaningful, and I still get to help people every day. That's different, I protested. You're literally saving lives. I'm just making things look pretty. The dismissive way I said it surprised everyone, including myself. Marcus looked up from his plate with a frown. "That's not fair to yourself," he said. "I've seen your work. That brand identity you did for the coffee roastery downtown? It was incredible. You helped them triple their sales in 6 months. A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel." Now, back to where we left off. His words were kind, but they also highlighted the fundamental problem with my career. Yes, I'd helped that coffee roastery succeed, but I'd charged them $3,000 for work that took me 2 months to complete. When I broke it down to an hourly rate, I was making less than minimum wage. Dad seemed to read my thoughts. "The problem isn't your talent, Sarah. The problem is your business model. You're trying to be an artist in a world that requires you to be an entrepreneur, and you don't have the stomach for the entrepreneurial part." The accusation stung because it was partially true. I loved the creative work, but hated everything else. Chasing down late payments, negotiating contracts, marketing myself, dealing with difficult clients who treated me like their personal servant rather than a professional. "So what are you suggesting?" I asked, trying to keep the defensiveness out of my voice. Dad exchanged a look with Mom, and I realized this conversation had been planned. They'd discussed this beforehand, maybe even rehearsed it. "Your Uncle Robert runs the marketing department at that tech company in Scottsdale," Dad said. "Henderson Digital Solutions. They're looking for an in-house graphic designer. The position comes with full benefits, 3 weeks paid vacation, and a starting salary of $52,000 a year." My stomach lurched. Uncle Robert was Dad's younger brother, the successful one who'd climbed the corporate ladder, while Dad had stayed at the same accounting firm for over 2 decades. The idea of working for him, of being the niece who needed family connections to get a job, made me feel sick. "You talked to Uncle Robert about me?" I asked, not hiding my horror. "He brought it up at Christmas," Mom said gently. "He mentioned they were hiring, and he asked about your work. We showed him your portfolio, and he was impressed." "But you didn't think to mention this to me?" Dad's jaw tightened. "We wanted to see if you'd figure things out on your own first. But Sarah, it's been almost 2 years. You're not figuring it out." The words hung in the air like an indictment. 2 years of chasing my dreams, and all I had to show for it was a precarious financial situation and a growing sense of anxiety about my future. "The position pays $52,000 annually," Dad continued. "That's about $4,300 a month before taxes. With benefits, vacation time, sick leave, and a 401k match, the total compensation package is probably worth closer to $60,000. I did the math quickly in my head. In my best year of freelancing, I'd made about $42,000, but that was before business expenses, taxes, and health insurance. My actual take-home had been closer to $28,000. The job Uncle Robert was offering would nearly double my real income. "But I'd be giving up my freedom," I said weakly. Rachel leaned forward. "Would you, though? I mean, real freedom comes from financial security, doesn't it? Right now, you're a slave to your next client. You can't take a real vacation because you can't afford to turn down work. You can't get sick because you don't have health insurance. You can't plan for the future because you don't know what you'll be making next month." Her words hit uncomfortably close to home. Just last month, I worked through a terrible case of the flu because I couldn't afford to delay a project. I hadn't taken a real vacation in over a year, and the stress of constantly worrying about money was starting to affect my sleep and my relationships. Marcus, who'd been quiet throughout most of this exchange, suddenly spoke up. "What if you took the job temporarily? Like, just for a year or two to build up some savings and get stable. Then you could go back to freelancing from a position of strength instead of desperation." It was a reasonable suggestion, but the idea of even temporarily giving up my independence felt like failure. I'd left the corporate world with such fanfare, telling everyone who'd listen about how I was going to build something meaningful, something that was truly mine. "The deadline for applications is next Friday," Dad said quietly. "Uncle Robert said he'd hold the position open until then, but after that, they need to move forward with other candidates. Next Friday. 7 days to decide whether to swallow my pride and take a corporate job, or continue struggling as a freelancer with no guarantee that things would get better." "I need to think about it," I said. Dad nodded. "That's all we're asking. Just think about it seriously. Not just about what you want to do, but about what makes sense for your life. The rest of dinner passed in uncomfortable small talk. Marcus told us about his upcoming graduation, Rachel mentioned a new dating app she was trying, and Mom talked about her garden plans for spring. But underneath it all, I could feel everyone's attention on me, waiting to see what I would decide. As we cleared the dishes, Mom pulled me aside in the kitchen. "Your father means well," she said softly. "He's worried about you, we both are." "I know," I replied, scraping leftover potatoes into the garbage disposal. "It's just hard to admit that maybe I was wrong about all this." Mom turned off the water and looked at me directly. "It's not about being wrong, honey. It's about being practical. There's no shame in taking a steady job. Plenty of people work during the day and pursue their passions in the evenings and weekends." But even as she said it, I knew it wasn't that simple. Creative work required more than just spare time. It required mental energy, inspiration, and the space to think deeply about problems. After 8 hours at a corporate job, would I have anything left to give to the work I actually cared about? As I drove home to my small apartment that night, Dad's question echoed in my mind. Not the one about Uncle Robert's job, but the earlier one that had started this whole conversation. If someone offered you a job with benefits and a predictable future, what would you need to make per month to consider giving up the freelance work? I realized I still didn't have an answer, but I had less than a week to figure it out. The next 3 days were torture. I found myself staring at my laptop screen, unable to focus on the logo design I was supposed to be finishing for a local veterinary clinic. Every time I tried to work, Dad's words would creep back into my mind. "You're 26 years old. You have no health insurance, no retirement savings, no emergency fund." I'd been avoiding the hard truths about my situation for months, maybe even longer. But having them laid out so starkly at Sunday dinner had shattered whatever illusions I'd been clinging to. The freedom I thought I'd gained by going freelance was starting to feel more like a prison of uncertainty. Tuesday morning, I did something I'd been putting off for weeks. I sat down with my laptop and a calculator to figure out exactly how much money I'd made over the past year. The results were even worse than I'd feared. January, $3,200 from the coffee roastery project. February, $800 from some small business cards and flyers. March, $0, the month I'd had food poisoning and couldn't work. April, $4,100 from a website redesign for a nonprofit. May, $1,200 from a logo that the client ultimately rejected. July, $2,800 from brochures from odds and ends. November, $1,004. Total, $23,000. $23,000. Before business expenses like software subscriptions, equipment, website hosting, and the premium coffee shop membership, I justified as a business expense. Before the quarterly tax payments, that always seemed to blindside me. Before health insurance that I'd been going without because I couldn't afford the monthly premiums. My actual take-home income was probably closer to $16,000. That was less than minimum wage if calculated hourly, considering all the unpaid time I spent on marketing, client communications, revisions, and administrative tasks. The veterinary clinic project sitting open on my screen would pay me $800 if I completed it this week. $800 for about 30 hours of work. That was roughly $26 an hour, which sounded decent until I remembered that as a freelancer, I didn't get paid for sick days, vacation time, or the countless hours I spent trying to find new clients. I closed the laptop and walked to my kitchen, which was barely large enough for one person to stand in comfortably. The apartment I'd been so proud of when I first moved in, a converted warehouse loft in an up-and-coming neighborhood, now felt like evidence of my poor decision-making. The exposed brick walls and industrial fixtures that had seemed so artistic 18 months ago just looked cold and impractical now. Opening the refrigerator revealed the stark reality of my grocery budget. Leftover takeout containers, a half-empty carton of milk that was probably expired, some wilted lettuce, and a collection of condiment packets I'd saved from various restaurants. I'd been telling myself that eating out was a business expense since I worked from coffee shops and restaurants. But the truth was that I'd never learned to grocery shop and meal prep properly, because I'd never had to stick to a strict budget before. My phone buzzed with a text from my college roommate Jessica, who who worked as a marketing coordinator for a pharmaceutical company in Denver. The message was a photo of her boarding a plane to Cancun with the caption, "Surprise long weekend getaway. Sometimes you just need vitamin C." I stared at the photo for a long time. Jessica and I had graduated with similar GPAs from the same program. She'd taken what I'd considered the boring corporate route, while I'd chosen the exciting creative path. Yet here she was, apparently doing well enough to take spontaneous vacations to Mexico, while I was rationing my grocery budget and sleeping on a mattress on the floor because I couldn't afford a proper bed frame. The comparison stung more than I wanted to admit. Wednesday afternoon, I forced myself to call Uncle Robert. I'd been dreading the conversation, but I needed more information about the position before I could make any kind of decision. "Sarah!" His voice boomed through the phone with the kind of enthusiasm that successful people seem to radiate effortlessly. "Your dad mentioned you might be interested in our opening. I have to say, your portfolio is impressive. That coffee roastery project was particularly strong." "Thank you," I said, trying to match his energy. "Could you tell me more about what the position would involve?" "Absolutely. We're looking for someone to handle all our visual communications, marketing materials, website graphics, social media content, trade show displays, that sort of thing. It's a mix of print and digital work, which I know you have experience with." It sounded remarkably similar to what I was already doing as a freelancer, just for one company instead of many different clients. "What's the team like?" I asked. "Well, you'd be working closely with our marketing manager, Linda Chen, brilliant woman, really strategic thinker. There's also a copywriter, David, and our social media specialist, Monica. They're a good group, very collaborative." The idea of having colleagues again was both appealing and terrifying. I'd been working alone for so long that I'd forgotten what it was like to have people to bounce ideas off of, to share the workload with, to simply talk to during the day. And the benefits package? Full health, dental, and vision coverage. Company pays 80% of the premium. 3 weeks paid vacation to start, 4 weeks after 3 years. We match 401k contributions up to 6%. And there's a professional development budget for conferences, courses, that sort of thing. I did some quick mental math. The health insurance alone would save me hundreds of dollars a month that I wasn't currently spending because I couldn't afford coverage. The 401k match was money I wasn't even thinking about as a freelancer. The paid vacation meant I could actually take time off without losing income. "When would you need someone to start?" I asked. "Ideally within the next month. We've got a big product launch coming up in June, and we'll need someone in place well before then to help with the campaign development." After hanging up, I sat in my apartment's single chair, a flea market find that looked artistic but was incredibly uncomfortable, and tried to imagine what my life would look like with that job. Waking up at the same time every day, commuting to an office, sitting in meetings, having a regular paycheck deposited into my account every 2 weeks. Part of me recoiled at the predictability of it all. But another part of me, a part that was growing stronger every day, was exhausted by the constant uncertainty of freelance life. That evening, I drove to the coffee shop where I'd done most of my best work over the past year. The owner, Marcus, not my brother but a 60-something former chef who'd opened the place after retiring from restaurant work, greeted me with his usual smile. "The regular spot?" he asked, gesturing toward my favorite corner table. I nodded and ordered my usual, a large coffee with an extra shot and a blueberry muffin that would serve as both lunch and dinner. As I settled into the familiar routine of opening my laptop and spreading out my work materials, I realized this might be one of my last times doing this if I took Uncle Robert's job. The thought should have made me sad, but instead, I felt something closer to relief. Around 9 o'clock, as I was finally making progress on the veterinary clinic logo, my phone rang. It was Rachel. "Hey," she said, and I could hear the hospital sounds in the background. "I'm on my break, and I wanted to check in. How are you doing with everything?" "Honestly, I don't know," I said, saving my work and closing the laptop. "I keep going back and forth." "Want to talk through it?" I found myself telling her about my income calculations, about the conversation with Uncle Robert, about seeing Jessica's vacation photos and feeling like I'd made all the wrong choices. Rachel listened without interrupting, which was one of the things I'd always loved about her. When I finally finished, she was quiet for a moment. Can I ask you something? She said finally. Sure. When you think about continuing to freelance, what does success look like? Like, in 5 years, what would have to happen for you to feel like you made the right choice? It was a question I'd been avoiding, but as soon as she asked it, I realized I didn't have a good answer. I'd been so focused on the idea of being my own boss, of being creative, that I'd never really defined what success would actually look like. I don't know, I admitted. And when you think about taking the corporate job, what scares you most about it? That I'll lose myself, I said immediately. That I'll become just another person in a cubicle, creating meaningless work for people I don't care about. But what if that's not what happens? Rachel asked gently. What if you find meaning in stability? What if you use the security to explore other creative projects on your own time, without the pressure of them having to pay your bills? I hadn't considered that possibility. In my mind, taking a corporate job meant giving up on my dreams entirely, but maybe it didn't have to be that black and white. I should probably make a decision soon, I said. Yeah, Rachel agreed. But whatever you decide, make sure you're choosing something rather than just running away from something else. After we hung up, I packed up my laptop and walked out into the cool Phoenix evening. Tomorrow was Thursday. I had less than 24 hours to make the decision that would determine the next chapter of my life. Thursday morning hit me like a freight train. I woke up to 3 missed calls from the veterinary clinic client, Dr. Amanda Torres, and a voicemail that made my blood run cold. Sarah, this is Dr. Torres. I need the logo designs by noon today because our printer is waiting, and we have marketing materials going out tomorrow. I've been very patient, but this is now urgent. Please call me back immediately. I checked my phone. It was 11:47 a.m. I overslept by 4 hours. Panic set in as I realized I'd barely started the final versions she needed. The concepts were there, but I hadn't created the print-ready files, hadn't provided the different format variations she'd requested, hadn't even finished the color schemes we'd discussed. What I had were rough sketches, and one semi-polished design that wasn't ready for professional use. I called her back with shaking hands. Dr. Torres, I am so sorry, I've been dealing with some personal issues, but that's no excuse. I can have the designs to you by when? She interrupted, and I could hear the frustration in her voice. Sarah, I hired you 6 weeks ago for what should have been a simple logo. 6 weeks. My marketing consultant found another designer who can deliver everything we need by tomorrow morning. My stomach dropped to the floor. Please, just give me until tonight. I can. I'm sorry, but I can't risk it anymore. I'll be honest with you. This isn't just about the delay. The design direction we discussed last week doesn't seem to be what you've been working toward. I think we might just not be a good fit. The line went dead. I sat on my mattress, staring at my phone, trying to process what had just happened. $800. Gone, just like that. But worse than the money was the realization that she was right. I had been distracted, unfocused, delivering work that wasn't my best. The stress of my financial situation and the decision about Uncle Robert's job had been affecting my work quality without me even realizing it. This was exactly what Dad had been talking about. The instability wasn't just financial, it was seeping into every aspect of my professional life. I opened my laptop and looked at my bank account. After paying rent 2 weeks ago, I had $347 remaining. My phone bill was due in 3 days, electric bill next week, and I needed groceries desperately. The loss of the veterinary clinic project didn't just mean missing out on future income, it meant I was now in immediate financial trouble. For the first time since leaving my corporate job, I felt genuine fear about my survival. I spent the next hour frantically reaching out to previous clients, offering rush services, discounted rates, anything to generate some immediate income. Most didn't respond. The few who did had nothing available or wanted work delivered so quickly that I knew I'd end up in the same situation I'd just experienced with Dr. Torres. By early afternoon, I was fighting back tears of frustration. I called Mom. Honey, what's wrong? She asked immediately, recognizing something in my voice. I told her about losing the veterinary clinic client, about my bank account, about the growing realization that I was in over my head. She listened patiently, making small, sympathetic sounds that somehow made me feel both better and worse. Do you need us to help with rent again? She asked gently. The question broke something inside me. Yes, I needed help. I needed help with rent, with groceries, with the basic act of surviving as an adult. At 26, I was still depending on my parents for financial rescue, just like I had in college. I don't know, I whispered, though we both knew the answer was yes. There's no shame in asking for help, Sarah, but maybe it's time to seriously consider other options. After we hung up, I walked to the small window in my apartment that looked out onto the parking lot. A family was loading groceries into their minivan. Parents and 2 kids, probably coming back from a normal trip to a normal grocery store, buying normal amounts of food without counting every dollar. I tried to remember the last time I'd felt that kind of security, that casual confidence that there would be enough money for whatever I needed. It might have been back when I had my corporate job, the one I'd been so eager to escape. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd left that job because I felt trapped, because I wanted freedom and creativity. But what I'd found instead was a different kind of trap, one made of constant anxiety, financial instability, and the exhausting work of always having to hustle for the next client. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Hi Sarah, this is Linda Chen from Henderson Digital Solutions. Your Uncle Robert gave me your number. I'd love to chat about the graphic designer position if you're still interested. Are you free for a quick call this afternoon?" I stared at the message for a long time. This was it, the universe forcing my hand. I could continue pretending that freelancing was working out, or I could admit that I needed the stability that a real job would provide. I called Linda back within 5 minutes. "Sarah, thanks for calling back so quickly. Robert showed me your portfolio, and I have to say I'm impressed." That brand identity for the coffee roastery was exactly the kind of strategic thinking we need here. Linda had a warm, professional voice that immediately put me at ease. She explained more about the company. They develop software solutions for healthcare systems, which meant their design work had real purpose behind it. They weren't just selling widgets. They were creating tools that helped doctors and nurses do their jobs better. "One thing that might interest you," Linda continued, "is that we encourage our team members to take on outside creative projects as long as they don't conflict with our work. Several people here have side businesses or passion projects. We believe that external creativity actually makes people better at their day jobs." This was something Uncle Robert hadn't mentioned, and it shifted my perspective significantly. Taking the job wouldn't mean giving up creative work entirely. It would mean having a stable foundation that would allow me to be more selective and strategic about the freelance projects I chose. "What would a typical day look like?" I asked. "Varied, which I think you'd enjoy. You might start the morning working on a trade show booth design, have a brainstorming session with the marketing team after lunch, and spend the afternoon creating social media graphics. We're launching a new product line this summer, so there's going to be a lot of exciting campaign work." The more Linda talked, the more appealing the position sounded. It wasn't the soul-crushing corporate environment I'd imagined. It was a team of people working together on projects that had real meaning, with the security and benefits that would allow me to focus on doing good work instead of constantly worrying about where my next paycheck was coming from. "I have to ask," I said, "what happened to the last person in this position?" Linda laughed. "Nothing dramatic. Kevin got an amazing opportunity to move to Portland and start his own design studio. Actually, he'd been working here for 3 years and had built up enough savings and professional connections to make the leap successfully. He said the experience here gave him the foundation he needed to go out on his own the right way." The right way. That phrase stuck with me. Maybe there was a way to pursue entrepreneurship that didn't involve struggling financially and compromising the quality of my work. Maybe the path to creative freedom actually required a period of stability first. "When would you need an answer?" I asked. "Well, we're hoping to make a decision by early next week. Would you be available to come in for an interview tomorrow? I know it's short notice, but I'd love for you to meet the team and see the office." Tomorrow was Friday, the deadline Dad had mentioned. The timing felt like more than coincidence. "Yes," I said, surprising myself with how quickly I responded. "I can be there tomorrow." We scheduled the interview for 10 a.m. and Linda sent me the address along with information about what to expect. After hanging up, I realized that for the first time in weeks, I felt something other than anxiety about my future. It wasn't quite excitement, more like cautious hope. I spent the rest of the afternoon updating my portfolio, researching Henderson Digital Solutions, and preparing for questions about why I wanted to leave freelancing for a corporate position. The honest answer was simple: because freelancing wasn't working. But I needed to find a way to frame that positively, to show that I was making a strategic choice rather than running away from failure. That evening, I called Dad. "I have an interview tomorrow," I said without preamble. "With Robert's company?" "Yes, Henderson Digital Solutions. I talked to the marketing manager today, and it sounds like a good opportunity." There was a pause, and when Dad spoke again, his voice was softer than it had been at Sunday dinner. "How are you feeling about it?" "Nervous," I admitted, "but also relieved, I think. I've been trying so hard to make freelancing work that I forgot there were other ways to have a creative career." "Your mother and I are proud of you for trying," Dad said, "and we'll be proud of you whatever you decide tomorrow. This isn't about giving up on your dreams, Sarah. It's about finding a sustainable way to pursue them." As I went to bed that night, I realized Dad was right. The choice I was facing wasn't between success and failure, or between creativity and conformity. It was between two different paths toward the same goal: building a life that was both meaningful and secure. Friday morning arrived with the kind of crisp Arizona sunshine that usually lifted my spirits, but today I felt nothing but nerves. I'd barely slept, alternating between rehearsing interview answers and second-guessing my decision to even show up. 3 times during the night, I'd grabbed my phone to call Linda and cancel, telling myself that I wasn't ready to give up on freelancing yet. But each time, I remembered Dr. Torres hanging up on me, remembered the $347 in my bank account, remembered the relief in Dad's voice when I told him about the interview. So I got dressed in the one professional outfit I still owned, a navy blazer and black pants I'd bought from my last corporate job, and drove to Scottsdale. Henderson Digital Solutions occupied the top 2 floors of a sleek glass building that screamed, "Successful tech company." The lobby had the kind of modern furniture that looked uncomfortable but probably cost more than my monthly rent. And a receptionist who greeted me with the type of genuine smile that suggested she actually enjoyed her job. "You must be Sarah," she said before I even introduced myself. "Linda's expecting you. Can I get you some coffee or water?" I accepted the coffee gratefully, needing the caffeine to steady my nerves. As I waited, I watched employees coming and going, people around my age, dressed casually but professionally, chatting easily with each other. The atmosphere felt relaxed but purposeful, nothing like the sterile corporate environment I'd imagined. Linda appeared exactly at 10 a.m., a petite woman in her early 40s, with short black hair and an energy that reminded me of my favorite college professor. She wore jeans and a colorful blazer that somehow looked both professional and creative. "Sarah, so glad to meet you in person. Ready for the grand tour?" The office was nothing like I'd expected. Instead of cubicles, there were open collaborative spaces mixed with quiet work areas and glass-walled meeting rooms. The walls displayed framed examples of their design work, clean, purposeful graphics that actually looked impressive. One entire wall was covered with thank you notes from healthcare workers who used their software. "This is where you'd be sitting," Linda said, stopping at a desk near a wall of windows overlooking the mountains. "David sits here," she gestured to the adjacent desk, "and Monica's over there. We like to keep the creative team close so we can bounce ideas off each other." David looked up from his computer and waved. He was probably in his 30s, wearing a vintage band t-shirt, and had the kind of friendly face that suggested he'd be easy to work with. Monica, meanwhile, was younger, maybe fresh out of college, and was intensely focused on what looked like a social media campaign layout. "Everyone here seems pretty focused," I observed. "We work hard, but we also respect work-life balance," Linda said. "I've been in jobs where creative people are expected to work 60-hour weeks because passion should be payment. That's garbage. Good work comes from people who are well-rested and inspired, not burned out and resentful." We continued the tour, and Linda introduced me to several other team members. Each person I met seemed genuinely excited about their work, talking about projects with the kind of enthusiasm I rarely felt anymore about my freelance clients. When was the last time I'd been genuinely excited about a design project, rather than just grateful for the income? The formal interview took place in a bright conference room with Linda and the company's creative director, a soft-spoken man named Thomas, who'd apparently seen my coffee roastery project and wanted to discuss my design process. "Walk me through how you approached that brand identity," he said, pulling up my portfolio on his laptop. I launched into the explanation, describing how I'd researched the target demographic, analyzed competitors, and developed a concept that reflected both the artisanal quality of the coffee and the modern aesthetic the owners wanted. As I talked, I realized I was more animated than I'd been in months. This was the part of design work I actually loved. The strategic thinking, the problem solving, the way a good design could help a business connect with its customers. What I appreciate about this project, Thomas said when I finished, is that it's not just pretty. You clearly understood the business objectives and designed something that would actually help them succeed. That's exactly the kind of thinking we need here. Linda leaned forward. Speaking of business objectives, we're launching a new patient portal system this summer, and we need someone who can help us communicate its benefits to healthcare administrators. These are busy people who don't have time for flashy marketing. They need clear, compelling information that helps them understand how our software will make their lives easier. She showed me some preliminary materials for the launch, and I found myself immediately brainstorming improvements. The messaging was solid, but the visual hierarchy was confusing, and the color scheme felt too corporate for something that was supposed to make healthcare more human. "What would you change about this?" Linda asked, and I realized she was testing me. I pointed out the hierarchy issues and suggested some modifications that would make the information more scannable. Healthcare workers are dealing with life and death decisions all day, I explained. They don't want to hunt through marketing materials to find the information they need. Everything should be immediately clear. Thomas and Linda exchanged a look that I couldn't quite read, but it seemed positive. "Tell us about your freelance experience," Thomas said, shifting the conversation. "What's been most challenging about working independently?" This was the question I'd been dreading, but I decided to be honest. The financial instability has been harder than I expected. I love creative freedom, but constantly worrying about where the next project is coming from makes it difficult to focus on doing my best work. I've realized that I'm a better designer when I'm not stressed about paying rent. That's refreshingly honest, Linda said. A lot of freelancers won't admit that the business side is challenging. What made you consider transitioning back to a full-time position? I want to focus on design, not on being a business owner, I said. I spent more time in the past year chasing invoices and marketing myself than actually designing. I'd rather be part of a team working on meaningful projects than worrying about whether I can afford groceries. The interview continued for another 30 minutes, covering everything from software proficiency to team collaboration preferences. By the time we finished, I felt surprisingly energized. These people were asking thoughtful questions about my work, treating me like a professional rather than a vendor, and talking about projects that actually mattered. "Do you have any questions for us?" Linda asked as we wrapped up. "What do you like most about working here?" I asked. Thomas answered first. "The mission, honestly. I know it sounds cheesy, but we're making tools that help healthcare workers do their jobs better. My wife is a nurse, and when she tells me about how our patient communication system helped her coordinate care for a complicated case, it makes all the design challenges worth it." Linda nodded. "For me, it's the balance. I've worked at agencies where we'd stay until midnight working on campaigns for energy drinks or fast fashion. Here, I work reasonable hours on projects that have real purpose, and I still have energy for my own creative projects at home. I paint on weekends, and I do volunteer design work for a local animal rescue. Having a stable job actually gives me more creative freedom, not less." That perspective hit me harder than I expected. All this time, I'd been thinking that a corporate job would kill my creativity. But what if it actually freed me to be more creative by removing the financial pressure? "We'd like to move quickly on this," Linda said as she walked me back to the lobby. "We have one more candidate interviewing Monday, but honestly, you're exactly what we're looking for. Would you be able to start in 2 weeks if we made an offer?" "Yes," I said without hesitation. "Great, we'll be in touch early next week." As I drove home, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months: genuine optimism about my professional future. The interview had reminded me why I'd gotten into design in the first place, not for the freelancer lifestyle or the illusion of independence, but because I loved solving visual problems and helping organizations communicate effectively. My phone rang as I was pulling into my apartment complex. It was Rachel. "How did it go?" she asked immediately. Better than I expected, I said, and found myself smiling for the first time in days. I actually think I want this job. That's wonderful. What changed your mind? I thought about it as I climbed the stairs to my apartment. I realized that what I thought was freedom was actually just a different kind of prison. I've been so worried about maintaining my independence that I forgot what I was supposed to be independent for. And what's that? To do work that matters. To be creative. To build something meaningful. I unlocked my door and stepped into my small apartment, but somehow it didn't feel as cramped as it had yesterday. I think I can do all of that better with a steady paycheck and a team of people who care about the same things I do. Rachel was quiet for a moment. I'm proud of you, she said finally. Not because you're giving up on freelancing, but because you're making a choice based on what you actually want instead of what you think you should want. That afternoon, I did something I hadn't done in months. I worked on a personal creative project just for fun. No client, no deadline, no payment involved. I spent 3 hours designing a poster for a fictional music festival, experimenting with typography and color in ways that felt playful rather than stressful. It was the most creative I'd felt in months, and I hadn't even gotten the job yet. Sunday evening, exactly 1 week after the dinner that had started this whole journey, I called Dad. I think I know what my answer is to your question, I said. Which question? The one about what I'd need to make monthly to consider giving up freelancing. Dad was quiet, waiting. The answer isn't a number, I continued. It's security. It's being able to focus on doing good work instead of worrying about survival. It's having colleagues and meaningful projects and the freedom that comes from not constantly stressing about money. So you're taking the job? If they offer it to me, yes. I could hear the relief in Dad's voice, but also something else. Pride, maybe, or respect for the decision-making process I'd gone through. Your mother's going to be so happy, he said. We both are. As I hung up the phone, I realized that Dad's question at dinner hadn't really been about money at all. It had been about helping me understand what I actually valued versus what I thought I should value. And the answer, it turned out, was much more complex than any dollar amount. Tomorrow, I would find out which path was right for me. Part 6, final. Monday morning felt different. Instead of the usual anxiety about checking my email for potential client inquiries that might not come, I found myself actually excited to hear from Linda. I'd spent the weekend researching Henderson Digital Solutions more thoroughly, looking at their case studies, and reading employee reviews online. Everything I discovered reinforced my growing conviction that this opportunity was exactly what I needed. The call came at 11:30 a.m. Sarah, it's Linda. Do you have a few minutes to chat? My heart started racing. Of course. Well, I have good news. We'd love to offer you the position. Thomas and I were both impressed with your portfolio and your approach to design thinking. You're exactly what our team needs. Relief flooded through me so intensely that I had to sit down. That's wonderful. Thank you so much. The starting salary is $54,000 annually. We bumped it up slightly from what your uncle mentioned because of your experience level, full benefits package, 3 weeks paid vacation, and you'd start Monday, April 8th. How does that sound? $54,000. I did the quick math. That was $4,500 a month before taxes, nearly triple what I'd been averaging as a freelancer. With benefits included, the total package was worth more than I'd made in the past 2 years combined. That sounds perfect, I said, trying to keep the emotion out of my voice. I accept. Fantastic! I'll send over the official offer letter today, and we can discuss any questions you have. Welcome to the team, Sarah. After hanging up, I sat in my apartment for several minutes, processing what had just happened. For the first time in almost 2 years, I knew exactly how much money I'd be making next month, and the month after that, and the month after that. The certainty felt almost foreign after so long living in financial uncertainty. I called Mom first. "Oh, honey, that's wonderful," she said, and I could hear her voice breaking slightly. "Your father and I are so proud of you." "Is Dad there?" I'd like to tell him myself. "He's at work, but he's gonna be thrilled. You know, he never doubted that you'd figure things out. He just wanted to make sure you had all the information you needed to make a good decision." That afternoon, I did something I hadn't been able to do in months. I went grocery shopping without a calculator. I walked through the aisles of the supermarket, picking out fresh vegetables, good coffee, actual ingredients for meals, instead of just whatever was cheapest. The total came to $87, which would have been a significant expense when I was freelancing, but now felt manageable. As I was loading groceries into my car, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Hi Sarah, this is Kevin Martinez, the designer who used to work at Henderson. Linda gave me your number and said you're joining the team. Congratulations! Would love to chat about the company and Portland coffee sometime." I smiled, remembering that Kevin was the person who'd left Henderson to start his own design studio in Portland. Linda had mentioned he'd used his 3 years at the company to build up savings and connections before making the entrepreneurial leap successfully. Maybe there was more than one path to creative independence after all. That evening, I drove to my parents' house for what had become an impromptu celebration dinner. Mom had made her famous lasagna, and even Marcus had driven over from his dorm to join us. The atmosphere was completely different from the tense dinner conversation just 8 days earlier. "So tell us about the company," Rachel said as we sat around the same oak table where this whole journey had started. I found myself talking enthusiastically about the team, the projects, the mission of helping healthcare workers. As I described the patient portal launch campaign and the strategic challenges involved, I realized how much I was looking forward to diving into work that felt meaningful. "You sound different," Marcus observed, "more excited about work than I've heard from you in a long time." He was right. Somewhere in the process of letting go of my freelance identity, I'd rediscovered my genuine enthusiasm for design challenges. "I have a confession," Dad said as Mom served dessert. Chocolate cake that she'd apparently made that afternoon in celebration. "I was never really worried about the money." I looked at him in surprise. "What do you mean? You spent that whole dinner talking about my financial situation." Dad smiled. "I was worried about you, about the stress you were under, about how it was affecting your work and your happiness. The money was just the most concrete way to talk about it." "I don't understand." "Sarah, you're incredibly talented. I knew you'd eventually figure out how to make a living with your skills. But I could see that the uncertainty was eating away at your confidence and your creativity. You weren't the same person who used to get excited about design projects in college." Mom nodded. "We could see how much you were struggling, even when you tried to hide it from us. Not just financially, but emotionally. So the whole conversation about Uncle Robert's job was about giving you permission to consider other options," Dad finished. "You'd gotten so invested in the idea that freelancing was the only way to have a creative career that you couldn't see there might be other paths that would actually make you happier." I thought back to that Sunday dinner, to the question that had seemed so confrontational at the time. If someone offered you a job with benefits and a predictable future, what would you need to make per month to consider giving up freelance work? Now I understood that Dad hadn't been asking about a dollar amount at all. He'd been asking me to think honestly about what I valued and what would actually improve my life. "The $2,000, I said suddenly, remembering his exact words from that dinner. "When you asked if $2,000 would be enough, you weren't talking about a specific job offer, were you?" Dad shook his head. "I was asking if you thought financial security required some impossible amount of money, or if you'd be willing to consider that stability itself had value beyond just the paycheck." The question had seemed like such a trap at the time, but now I realized it had been an invitation to reconsider my assumptions about success and career satisfaction. "For what it's worth," Rachel said, "I think you made the right choice. Not because corporate jobs are better than freelancing, but because this particular opportunity seems like a perfect fit for what you actually want." 3 weeks later, I was sitting at my new desk at Henderson Digital Solutions, working on mock-ups for the patient portal campaign. David had brought me coffee from the good machine in the break room. Monica had shared an article about typography trends that she thought I'd find interesting, and Linda had stopped by to see how I was settling in. "Any regrets?" she asked. I looked around the office at the mountain view from my window, at my colleagues collaborating on a project that would genuinely help people, at the steady paycheck that would be deposited into my account the following Friday. "None," I said, and meant it completely. That weekend, I did something I hadn't been able to do in almost 2 years. I worked on a personal creative project without any anxiety about whether it would pay my bills. I was designing a logo for the animal rescue where Rachel volunteered, donating my time because I wanted to help, rather than because I needed the income. The design flowed easily, without the pressure and desperation that had characterized so much of my freelance work. Having a stable foundation had freed me to be creative in ways I'd forgotten were possible. On Sunday evening, exactly 3 weeks after the dinner conversation that had changed everything, I called Dad. "I figured out the answer to your question," I said. "Which one?" "What I'd need to make monthly to consider giving up freelancing." The answer was never about a specific dollar amount. "What was it about?" "Peace of mind," I said, looking around my apartment, which I'd finally been able to furnish properly with my first Henderson paycheck. The freedom to focus on doing good work instead of constantly worrying about survival. The ability to be creative without desperation. Dad was quiet for a moment. "And how much is peace of mind worth?" I smiled, remembering the fear and anxiety that had dominated my life just a month ago, and comparing it to the calm confidence I felt now. "It's priceless," I said, "but apparently in Phoenix in 2025, it costs about $54,000 a year plus benefits." Dad laughed, the first genuine laugh I'd heard from him since before his company's downsizing. "That," he said, "sounds like a bargain." As I hung up the phone, I realized that the silence at that Sunday dinner hadn't been judgment after all. It had been my family giving me space to finally hear the answer I'd been avoiding for months. Sometimes the most important questions aren't the ones that have easy answers. They're the ones that force you to examine what you really want from life. 6 months later, I was promoted to senior graphic designer at Henderson. Kevin and I had indeed connected over Portland coffee, and he'd become an informal mentor, showing me how to build creative side projects without the financial pressure that had once made every design decision feel desperate. I'd started taking weekend photography classes and had even sold a few prints at a local art fair, not because I needed the money, but because I wanted to explore a new creative outlet. The veterinary clinic that had fired me reached out through a mutual contact, asking if I'd be interested in redesigning their website. I politely declined, recommending another freelancer instead. It felt good to turn down work from a position of choice rather than necessity. Marcus graduated and landed his own corporate job at a Phoenix startup. Rachel bought her first house, Mom's garden flourished, and Dad got a promotion at his accounting firm when the company's finances stabilized. Our Sunday dinners returned to their comfortable rhythm, though now they featured more laughter and less anxiety about anyone's future. Sometimes people asked if I missed the freedom of freelancing. The question always made me smile, because I'd learned that true freedom isn't the absence of structure. It's having enough security to make choices based on what you want rather than what you need. That dinner conversation had taught me that sometimes the most liberating thing you can do is admit that your current path isn't working, and choose a different one. And sometimes the scariest conversations are the ones you need most. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now, and hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.